Hello and welcome back to the Historically Accurate podcast, where we look at works of historical media and judge them harshly on their accuracy. In this episode, we will be looking at the story of Macbeth, written by William Shakespeare in the 1600s. William Shakespeare was a well-known playwright during Elizabethan-era England, and his plays would lay the groundwork for our current entertainment industry. He would write many of his most famous stories on historical figures such as Henry IV and Julius Caesar, with these stories' portrayal of these characters having little accuracy to how these people were actually like. The story of Macbeth is no exception, and it is filled with historical inaccuracies. But before we look into its flaws, I would like to announce today's sponsor. Introducing Party Mix, the best possible treat for either one of your big ol' animals. As you can see, cats love this stuff. They make them so happy. You can even feed it to your dog. She's begging. Look at her. All right, Lucy, you ready? Sit. Sit, Lucy. Oh, good doggy. Sit. Paw. Paw. Yeah. Oh, paw. Paw. Don't try and eat it. All right, fine. Here you go. Yeah. You got it. Apparently, these versions are made with turkey and gravy flavors. They still want some more. You can't have any more. It make you too skinny. Okay. A party's starting mix it. It's under 2 calories per treat. You can't have any more. It's gonna make you sick. No more, Sammy. No. So buy your own bag of party mix Friskies today. Before we begin, I should give a short summary of the story of Macbeth so that I can do the best job I can at explaining the topic for anyone who hasn't read the book. The story revolves around a military general named Macbeth, a real historical figure set in Scotland during the early 11th century. Macbeth is a loyal but ambitious minor noble of the Scottish nobility who is easily influenced by his even more ambitious and cruel wife, who is called in Shakespeare's story Lady Macbeth. One night, after a battle, Macbeth, along with his friend Banquo, are given prophecies from 3 witches who state that Macbeth will become Thane of Cawdor and later King of Scotland, while Banquo's descendants will later inherit the Scottish throne. The witches' prophecies later prove to seem reliable, as Macbeth later becomes Thane of Cawdor when the position is given to Macbeth by the old, wise, and popular current King of Scotland, Duncan. Macbeth would write to his wife, Lady Macbeth, telling her of all the promising foretellings of their future, but Lady Macbeth, fearing her husband would be too weak to take any actions to obtain the throne, influenced him to take matters into his own hands and kill King Duncan to become king. Macbeth reluctantly agrees to this and kills Duncan in his sleep while he was staying at Macbeth's castle, later allowing Macbeth to become king after Duncan's sons flee Scotland. Macbeth would continue to use murder to maintain his position on the throne, killing entire noblemen's families and even killing his own friend Banquo to ensure his friend's descendants don't obtain the throne. Macbeth's actions would corrupt him, turning him into a tyrant who cares for nothing except his own position and power. Macbeth is only overthrown when one of the king's sons, Malcolm, returns to Scotland with an army from England and kills Macbeth, ending his tyrannical reign. While Shakespeare's play was based on real historical events that took place in medieval Scotland, many of the events and personalities of the characters themselves have been changed in order for Shakespeare to achieve his overall narrative in writing his play. What this narrative was, we will discuss later, but first we must explain in what ways Macbeth and his rise and fall from power over Scotland were different from how he is portrayed in this Shakespearean play. And any information that I use as historical evidence I got from historicuk.com, which to my best knowledge seems to be a credible source. Before we talk about Macbeth or anyone else in the story, we must talk about King Malcolm of Scotia, King of the Scots and Picts, who united the warring clans and 4 kingdoms of Scotland under one throne. This was not the same Malcolm in the story of Macbeth, but was instead the grandfather of King Duncan, with Duncan later becoming the new King of Scotland once Malcolm of Scotia died. But this Duncan was nothing like the king depicted in Macbeth's story. This Duncan was not old, or wise, or as popular as we were told he was in Shakespeare's play. The real King Duncan was only 17 years old when he became King of Scotland. He had a much weaker character than his grandfather and was a terrible leader, once leading Scotland into a disastrous defeat in a campaign against Northumbria, modern-day England. Macbeth was also much different from how he was portrayed in Shakespeare's play. His full name was Macbeth Mac Finlech, but was translated to Macbeth in English due to Shakespeare himself and most of Shakespeare's audience being English. In Shakespeare's original story, Macbeth had no real claim to the throne of Scotland, being a minor noble, and only obtained the throne because he was the only person left to fill the power vacuum after Duncan died. But historically, Macbeth had a respectable claim to the throne, being a descendant of a major noble named Kenneth MacAlpin through his mother. Also, Macbeth was called the Thane of Glamis in the play before becoming the Thane of Cawdor, but Macbeth was never the Thane of Glamis because Glamis was not a thanage in the 11th century and was never Thane of Cawdor, but was instead known as Mormary of Moray before becoming king. Macbeth also didn't murder Duncan in his sleep, though he did attempt to kill Duncan as part of a conspiracy he planned with other nobles. Macbeth instead formed an alliance with his cousin, the Earl of Orkney, against Duncan and later defeated him in battle, allowing Macbeth to become king. Macbeth himself was also not the tyrant Shakespeare's story made him out to be. He was actually respected for his strong leadership and wise rule, maintaining the Scottish throne for 17 years and not a single year like in Shakespeare's play. Macbeth was overthrown by Duncan's son Malcolm, known as Malcolm III, but this was more gradual and not sudden like in the play, as Malcolm would defeat Macbeth in battle and Macbeth would give lands to Malcolm while remaining king, until Malcolm later defeated Macbeth a second time, killing Macbeth and becoming Scotland's new king. The number of inaccuracies in Shakespeare's play Macbeth compared to actual historical events was surprising. This was because of the limited and largely biased historical documents at Shakespeare's disposal that portrayed Macbeth in a negative light, due to the political intentions of later Scottish kings under Malcolm to maintain control over their lands and paint their royal family in a positive light. Shakespeare also introduced certain aspects of Macbeth's story that were not historically accurate to appease James IV of Scotland, who was also known as James I of England. He would inherit the English throne after the death of Queen Elizabeth of England while already being the King of Scotland. Shakespeare's play would intentionally depict Macbeth, someone who would be seen as an enemy of Scotland due to biased information, as a tyrant to paint James, a descendant of Malcolm III, and his family history in a positive light and gain James's approval of the story. James also declares himself a descendant of the Banquo that Shakespeare depicts in his play. This Banquo was portrayed as a noble and loyal man who resists evil, and the witches in Shakespeare's play state that Banquo's children will become kings, something which was done intentionally to give any of Banquo's descendants, including King James, a prophetic right to rule. Banquo, in reality, was quite the opposite, being an accomplice in Macbeth's efforts to overthrow Duncan. But describing the ancestor of a king in this way would have likely had negative consequences for Shakespeare and his career. The use of witches in Macbeth was also done to appease King James, since James believed in the existence of witches and was an active participant in witch trials, overseeing the execution and torture of people presumed to be witches. Even though there are many historical inaccuracies in Macbeth, it is unlikely any of them were done out of malicious intent on Shakespeare's part, due to the limitations in Shakespeare's ability to research the events and limits on freedom of speech to express the parts of a historical Macbeth play. Nonetheless, it cannot be denied that Shakespeare's Macbeth has certainly had an impact on literacy and media that shaped our modern entertainment industry along with Shakespeare's other plays and writings. That's all for today. Thank you all for listening and have a good day.